Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the F1 budget cap, the proposed budget cap, some of the discussions that are going on in the background, some of the effects that it might have, some of the controversies. We're going to go into a lot more detail around that, but before I get into all of that, I just want to say a huge thank you to so many people who sent a load of love after yesterday's video. I mentioned at the beginning of yesterday's video how I'd kind of struggled a little bit the day before. Nothing serious, genuinely nothing serious, but it was a bit of a struggle. It hit me by surprise because it's so out of the ordinary for me, and so many of you took time out of your day to write to me, both in the comments of the YouTube video, but also on social media, and some people sent me emails. So many people sending me love, making sure that I'm okay, which I genuinely appreciate, and I am, thank you. But also people sharing their own stories of how they've struggled, and that was quite touching for me because it's not an easy thing to do. And what it really did strike home was that how powerful this little community that we've built in our corner of YouTube, how powerful that is. You know, when it's particularly, I guess, in a time where we can't all get together physically. So this is a time when we have to start sharing stuff with the people, like-minded people. That's what this community has got. It's a group of like-minded people who all have a passion and an interest for the same thing, which is cars or motorsport, Formula One, whatever it is you call it. So thank you very much if you, first of all, took the time to watch it, but if you then took the time to send me a message afterwards. Believe me, it doesn't go unnoticed. I read them all. Genuinely, I've read every single one. I've responded, I think, to pretty much all of them that needed a response, and I honestly appreciate them, so thank you very much. The other bit of news that I need to tell you about today, which is quite exciting, is that I had a phone call conversation yesterday with none other than Will Buxton, Formula One's own Will Buxton. And we had a big chat because he's also, like I am, very passionate about encouraging kids to get into Formula One, or to take up watching Formula One to a greater level. And what came out of our conversation was that we have decided to do another one of those kids Ask Elvis specials. But this time it won't just be Ask Elvis, it'll be Ask Elvis and Will, because Will's going to do it with me. So what I need from you lot is more of what you gave me last time. I want questions from your children on anything to do with Formula One. Any question they might have about the cars, about the sport, about the drivers. I mean, Will and I have different backgrounds. You know, we have a different insight into the sport, but hopefully that means we can both give opinions on different questions that might come in. So I think it could be great fun. I think it could be really interesting, and I'm really pleased that Will has agreed to come on and join me for that one. So I will give all the details in the description of the video, but what I need basically is exactly what happened before. I need you lot to send me a video, just done on your phone in landscape mode, to the phone on its side, of your little one asking a question, whether it's a cute question, a funny question, a silly question. It could be a really serious question. It could be a really awkward question that makes it very awkward for Will or I to try and answer it. But you know, that would be great fun. So any of those, just in short form, email them to me at the email address that's on the bottom of the screen right now, and I will email you back with a release form to sign. That gives us permission to use the footage, and that video will hopefully be coming your way very soon, as soon as we have enough questions to fill it. So thank you in advance for anyone who's willing to do that. I really appreciate that as well. I think it's going to be great. So let's talk the F1 budget cap, because as we know, most of us know, there have been discussions around this for a long time now about bringing the amount of money that particularly the top teams spend to be competitive within their sport. At the moment, for those top teams like Mercedes, like Ferrari, it's probably up well over 300 million a season. Now that's an insane amount of money in anybody's book. And the biggest problem with all of that, because that's fine as long as that's sustainable for those people, as long as they can continually find a reliable source of that income stream to support that, that's okay. But the problem is there's only one or two teams that can do that. And that means that the rest of the grid, not only are they behind in terms of what they can spend, but they are so far behind that it means that they're not even in the same league. They're not even racing in the same kind of Formula One. So there's a need to try and level that playing field, because, as we know, if you spend the money in the right way in Formula One, it can and should translate directly into performance of your car. Now, Mercedes are a great example of that working. They've done an incredible job. Yes, they've spent a lot of money, but they've spent it wisely, they've spent it very well, and just look at the results they've had off the back of that. Ferrari could be an example of where that hasn't worked. They have equally had a huge amount, almost an unlimited amount of money available to them, and yet they haven't won a championship since way back in 2007. They have probably been the team that spent most money consistently year on year, and yet the results haven't come off the back of that. Now, I know that there are a whole number of reasons why Ferrari haven't won a world title in a number of years, and this video is not really going to go into those. You know, everyone will have their own opinion on those, rightly so. What this video really is about is do we need the budget cap? First of all, I think there's a very clear answer to that, in that we do, because the sport has to be sustainable long term, and under the current arrangement it just isn't. That's the simple plain facts of things, even more so off the back of this huge global financial challenging situation that's going on right now. That's why the talks have become accelerated. The kind of the numbers that we're talking about have become more extreme, and that is why in turn people like Ferrari are getting a little bit upset by it. Now, I spoke yesterday about how the impact of a budget cap could literally save some teams. Haas, for example, look like they're even reconsidering staying in Formula One, something they were seriously questioning before this period of time was being talked about. And Williams are probably in exactly the same boat. So that's clearly a positive. And I think even Ferrari accept that there is definitely a need to put some kind of cap on spending. It's the level of that budget cap and the way that it's introduced that seems to be the bone of contention, particularly around Ferrari's comments the other day. Now, before all of this all kicked off, there was an agreement, at least in principle, from all teams to accept a budget cap in the financial regulations, which starts at the end of January for 2021, of $175 million. Now, everybody had agreed to that in principle. That was on the table. That was going to happen. What's happened since, of course, is that everything that's kicked off in the world has kicked off, and now there's a growing desire to bring that down even further, with the argument for that being to help the sport and help the teams within the sport to survive and prosper. Now, I should just say that that figure of 175 million that was tabled before was exclusive of driver salaries and the salaries of the 3 highest paid members of any team. It also only applies to racing activities, so car development, car performance development. It doesn't apply to things like marketing spend, where obviously the bigger 3 teams clearly spend a lot more in that area as well. So there are some caveats to this. This is not a straightforward, straight line in the sand and say you cannot spend more than this amount. Now, there are already arguments I've seen from lots of people in the comments to other videos about that. About saying, people saying, well, why on earth would it not include things like driver salaries or the highest paid members of the team? I mean, surely that's a huge part of what these teams spend. And if we're trying to cap spending in the sport in general, well, shouldn't that be part of it? That's a good argument to some extent. It's quite a difficult one to introduce when you've already got stars of our sport being paid, 40 million quid at the leading end, to suddenly ask them to slash that, what would have to be slashed to a fraction of that to be able to fit in with the budget cap. That's not an easy thing to implement. So maybe we can work towards that over a longer period of time, but actually it's not something that can be just brought in 2021 with the rest of this arrangement. Looking at that initial figure of 175 million, you could say that that's probably somewhere roughly in the middle of the spread of budgets that teams across the grid probably spend, with the big teams at well over 300, the smaller teams well down below 100. They have managed to agree, and this took some agreement in the first place to get the big teams to swallow that, to come down to 175 million. You can see immediately, though, that favours some teams more than others. The teams that are already around that area, perhaps somebody like Renault, for example, that might be somewhere close to 175 million as their standard budget, well, that means they've got an advantage, doesn't it? Because they don't have to compromise anything to fit in with that. Whereas the big teams clearly do. They have to change their way of working. They may have to lay staff members off to get down to that figure. So then you start looking at why people are now talking about bringing it down further, And clearly that argument has been led by the teams at the lower end of the spend range. And because if we can bring it down even closer to 100 million, well then it really favours those smaller teams, doesn't it? It starts to bring them much more in line with the big teams in terms of what resource they have at their disposal. That's where this argument really stems from. Yes, of course, there's a growing concern about the state of the sport and about the state of the teams within it. But like it's always the case in Formula One, everybody has their own interests at heart when it comes to these kind of discussions. Which, of course, is exactly what prompted Ferrari's comments the other day. Comments that were initially misconstrued as them threatening to quit Formula One, again, but were later clarified as them talking about potentially having to find other avenues to pursue as well as Formula One to be able to showcase their engineering capabilities and expertise to market, you know, their core products. They're of course trying to do exactly the same thing, look after themselves. Whereas smaller teams have a real interest in lowering the budget cap as low as it can go because it suits them, Ferrari of course have the opposite. They want it kept as high as possible because that is where their advantage sits. Their arguments around this sit in two main camps. One is that they think Formula One should be the very pinnacle. It should be expensive and exclusive, and it should have a certain amount of glamour attached to it. It should be the very best of the best when it comes to engineering, people, drivers. Everything should be the very pinnacle, and that's expensive. And I do actually understand that argument. There's a genuine case that is true, because otherwise it falls too close to the lower categories, doesn't it? The F2s and the F3s and things like that. The other argument for them is that they, along with some other teams, are kind of parent teams, aren't they? They're teams that supply parts and components of cars along with power units to other teams on the grid, and because of that their expenditure is far greater than a team like Haas that can simply go and buy the components. They don't have personnel costs like Ferrari have, and so on and so on. And that's also a really valid argument. It's what makes this so complicated a thing to try and achieve, in that it can suit everybody. But surely that's what Formula One's really good at, is overcoming challenges like this. How hard can it really be when we're looking at resetting the playing field to find a budget cap that does work for most people in a broad sense? I mean, I know it's very basic and I realise it's far more complex than this in real life, but if a customer team buys a component from a parent company, from a parent team, well, there's a cost attached to that, isn't there? If they're spending £100 on a piece of equipment that parent team has had to pay a certain amount of money to produce, well, surely we can somehow manage to match up those two costs, even in the broadest terms, in a budget cap. So if a team spends £100 on buying a component from Ferrari, well, that £100, of course, comes off their budget for the season of the smaller team. But from Ferrari's point of view, they can charge whatever it might be. They're charging that £100 to Haas or whoever. Well, that £100, can't that come off their budget cap? So it's literally like a set of accounts. You spend something, it brings your budget down. If you sell something, that's added to your pot. I mean, there must be clear and simple ways to allow that to happen. And I know I am simplifying it, but surely we've got a bunch of very clever people in Formula One. There must be ways that we can make this happen. And the first stage of this for 2021 is about getting something done, taking the first step, and it will only evolve over time. The thing that I would love to see us get to, perhaps once this has all worked itself out and settled itself down after a year or so, is for us to be able to have a strict budget cap, but then start to relax some of the technical rules. You know, most of our technical restrictions right now, the things that restrict innovations, things like DAS, that was so brilliantly introduced pre-season by Mercedes, well, that's been written out of the next set of regulations, mostly because they don't want all the teams to have to spend money on developing a system like that. Well, why not let the teams spend their budget however they want? Let them do whatever they want as long as they remain within this very strict budget cap that we can somehow end up on that's relatively fair for everybody. That would be an amazing Formula One. That would bring back the innovation and that engineering brilliance whilst keeping the whole thing under control and somewhat sustainable. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on all this. What would you do Is there a simple answer? Is there an answer? You know, there's too many people arguing about different ideas that suit them right now. Is there something we can do that makes it fair enough for everybody to take part on a more level playing field and makes the sport one that can survive through more times if they come along like this one? Anyway, there we go. Thank you very much for watching again today. A quick reminder that I would love to see videos sent to me at that email address that I mentioned earlier. I'll pop it on the screen again now. And it's all in the description, of children asking questions around F1 that myself and Will Buxton will answer together in a video on this channel that's coming up very, very soon. So really looking forward to that. Tomorrow I'm going to be back with more Tales from the Treehouse. If you saw that video last week, it went down very well. So I've got another story to go into some detail and expand on from my book and from my time in Formula One that I hope you'll really enjoy. So until then, stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you tomorrow. Ta-da.